We are learning to trust the ever-evolving rhythms of nature.
We are committed to embracing our shadow within community
and reclaiming our sovereignty.
We do this together.
That is the way.
All right, my friend, welcome to the podcast space. For anyone listening, this is the Elemental Movement podcast, and my name is Elden, and I'm sitting here with my friend and brother, Matt. And Matt, want to give you a little space to introduce yourself real quick, like?
Yeah, so I felt compelled to hop on a call with Elden right now. It is a Sunday, and this previous Thursday, so just a few days ago, my family went through one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives and of my life, where my daughter nearly died of complications due to a febrile seizure.
Can you just break down, I don't know if I know what a febrile seizure is. What is this?
Basically, she had a rapid onset fever due to a very minor cold. It was called an adenovirus.
Mhm.
And she, because of that rapid onset and because she's only 15 months old, she ended up getting a seizure, which is actually fairly common, and it's actually not dangerous. So it's very scary. Your kid's seizing, but it won't cause any lasting damage. And they say if it's 5 minutes or less, you don't even have to call 911. Maybe call a doctor and they go in to check on her, but it's not a big deal. But for Indy, my daughter, she ended up having trouble breathing within minutes of the seizure coming on. Because of that, she nearly died. So I guess I'll just dive right into the story.
Yeah, please.
At 5 p.m., my wife and I were both home with our children preparing dinner. Everyone was fine. By 5:15, my daughter was acting a little funny. She went off on her own, which she never does, walked off on her own, little 15-month-old baby, and just started staring into the light. And I went and checked on her. I was like, what's going on? And she looked at me. She didn't even look at me. She couldn't even make eye contact, but she just had this look of terror on her face. And the sad, like the saddest face. Like she was so terrified, uncomfortable, in pain. I don't know what was going on, but she was terrified for sure. And she couldn't move. She was frozen standing. And then I started seeing her start to tremor. And I brought her upstairs. And I'm like, hey, I think Indy's something's wrong with her. And I could feel that she was incredibly hot. And when I had just picked her up a half hour before, 15 minutes before, she wasn't hot at all. So then I put her down next to where we were cooking dinner. And then we noticed a minute later, she was acting even weirder. She was holding on to something and she was shaking. And it was I think she's having a seizure. So my wife picked her up and she took her into her arms and could then hear that she was labored with her breath. And she had eaten a cracker right beforehand, before this whole started happening. So I was like, is she choking? So we started giving her the basically Heimlich, where you smack her on the back. Nothing popped out. I kind of had her upside down. I scooped her mouth a little bit to see if there was anything obstructing her airway. Now you're not supposed to actually do that because it can push things in further. But I did it in a way that I thought that wouldn't happen. And yeah, there was nothing there, but she was not breathing. She's basically, it was really struggling to take every breath while she was seizing. So we immediately pulled the ripcord and we're like, something's not right. We're going to the emergency room. And there's a piece to that I want to come back to, of why we picked it up so quickly and pulled that ripcord so quickly. It's absolutely insane. But anyways, my 2.5-year-old son was like told he knew something was wrong. He always protests. He was like, "Yeah, let's go, Dada. Grab my shoes." He grabs his shoes. He grabs his jacket. We load up. Indy. My wife grabs Indy. She runs into the car. I grab her car seat. We toss everything in, peel out, take off. It's a 20-minute drive to the ER, and I skipped every stop sign on the way there. I drove 80 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. I had the flashers going. I was honking the whole way. I got there in like 12 minutes. I was driving so fucking fast. And halfway there, my daughter stopped breathing.
Jesus.
And my wife had to perform rescue breaths while I was flying 90 miles an hour down the road to get to the hospital. And the whole time, I'm trying to get a hold of 911, which is busy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to settle down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And once we got hold of 911, they told us to pull over and to wait for an ambulance. And we were like, just let us know if we should keep giving her rescue breaths, because we weren't aware. Like, we don't know what you're supposed to do when someone's having a seizure. But we intuitively, instinctively, like, we should probably keep giving her rescue breaths because we want to make sure she has oxygen. So my wife, who knows infant CPR, continued giving her CPR. Thank God we didn't put her in a car seat. And the 911 told us, we can't give you medical advice. We'll connect you to an EMT. And the EMT said, we can't give you medical advice. And so we just hung up the phone and I just focused on driving. And it got us to the ER. My wife ran her into the ER, pediatric ER. They scooped her up and they took control of the situation while I parked and, made sure my son was okay. And then we went in there to see if one of our family members was still alive. And so when my wife walked out of the ER to let me know what was going on, at that point I didn't know if she had survived or not. And I asked her, is she still alive? And that was probably the hardest thing for my wife of the whole experience, was just like recognizing how much like her rock, her anchor, her man was like, he wasn't certain. I wasn't certain that she was going to make it. And that made her ever more scared. In discussing it later, we talked about that. And she's like, that was the hardest part for me right there. But she was still alive. And then for the next 3 hours, she was in the resuscitation room of the pediatric ER. And in that time, we had, and I reached out to a number of people. First, yourself and your woman, Isla. And you guys graciously came and picked up Bodhi. Dropped everything immediately. And that was so amazing to have that support. And that literally brought me to tears, just to know that, people have you in these moments. And then we reached out to neighbors and they were supportive. We had a neighbor watch Bodhi overnight while we were staying in the ER so you guys could go back home. And it was incredible to have all that support. But while we were going through that, or while we were having that support, there was also, our sweet girl was fighting for her life. And while we were in there, those 3 hours of waiting to get her stable, we're fucking hell. And it was kind of like, is this really happening? Are we really going to lose this girl right now? We can't lose her. The doctors were not optimistic. They were very quiet. They would slink off and talk to each other very quietly out of the room when they had to discuss things, out of, I think, respect for us, right? Because they couldn't get her seizures to stop. She ended up having a 3-hour long seizure. And, fortunately, I mean, the most important thing was to get her oxygen and to make sure she was still breathing.
Mm,
And so they did that, but it got so bad with being able to get her oxygen that they ended up having to intubate her
mhm,
and get a breathing tube down her throat. And in that too, there was some complications that happened where I think the machine wasn't working properly or something. But anyways, a doctor ended up having to like manually pump that that thing, whatever that little thing is to get the air in, for
mhm,
like a half hour.
mm,
And like, I'm watching like shake her arms out afterwards when they got the replacement machine, which was, a whole nother layer to it. You'd hear, the amount of beeps you'd hear that were, concerning, and, the whole room filled with like 12 doctors and nurses. The energy would elevate and almost go into a state of panic, is
mhm,
what the word is. Because
mhm,
it'd be like there'd be these moments where it was like things were slipping away and they would catch it, but it's like you could feel how tenuous that life was.
mm,
And part of the modern medicine, like the miracle, like they saved her fucking life, I have no doubt.
mhm,
But like part of their skill or part of their toolkit, their power, they use medications that actually like take life away in order to
mm,
save her. So they were pumping her full of fentanyl. They were pumping her full of like 3 or 4 seizure anti-seizure medications, right? And all these things were
mm,
depressing her ability to breathe,
mhm,
depressing her ability to fight and to fight this thing. And you could feel that, but like they needed to do it because if they're gonna put a fucking breathing tube down her neck, they need to have her numbed out for, her comfort as well as her just like willingness to allow that to happen, right?
mm,
And so it
mhm,
was it was necessary, but it was also so challenging because it's like there's that push and pull of like you're kind of killing her right now and you're saving her. I could
mm,
feel that.
mhm,
And in that whole 3 hour stretch, that limbo where we didn't know if she was going to survive the night, you didn't know she was, had something seriously wrong with her, a brain bleed, meningitis, some really bad infection that would, end up killing her
mm,
before we knew, or we were reasonably sure it was a complex febrile seizure. The only thing that gave me comfort was my spiritual practice and my
mm,
really my connection to spirit.
mm,
It was all I had. And my connection to my brothers and sisters out there that would give their like connection to spirit to me in this moment too, right? Through their prayers. And so my wife and I, we reached out to everyone we thought of that could like offer that to us. And, who knows? But for me, it helped. It helped a tremendous amount. And like for anyone who's listening that did offer your prayers, like I'm, I'm just humbly so thankful that you gave that to us because it meant everything.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just speak to that last bit that you just shared. Like I was one of those people praying, and I had this image as you were sharing just now of like really indie being the center point of a whole grid of human beings
Mm-hmm.
connecting in a common purpose across time and space,
Mm-hmm.
and that is felt, and that feeling is valid
Mm-hmm.
and really valuable. And
Yeah.
who knows, like objectively, like what that did for indie, but something happened that we
Yeah.
can't explain. And like personally, I feel like that's like for the best that we can't explain it.
I agree.
How are you feeling in your body right now, man?
I think going through that experience, I'm still a little like disconnected, a
Yeah,
little numb
yeah.
from it. And, it doesn't stop for us, right? Because we got these these young children that we have to take care of, right? And so it's like you can't really take care of yourself in that moment. Even just getting this time right now
Yeah.
to talk to you, like we've been trying to do this for the last 24 hours, right? And it's been like, oh, I can't do it right now because I got to take care of my son. Oh, I can't do it right now because I got to make sure my daughter's still doing okay. And she's doing really well now, which is
Yeah.
fucking amazing. And we're so relieved about it. But I have an awareness that like I'm gonna have to make sure to do the things to offload this and to take care of it. And I have been ever since um that first after spending the first night in the hospital. I've been like doing my practices. There's been a lot of tears that have been shed, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
welling of emotion, just letting it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's happening, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a process, and it'll take time.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, how could it not? One of the things that I'm just noticing here, and like this is not a criticism in any way, is
Hmm.
in telling this story, I know this is like part of it. It's like there's almost like this piece of you that has had to step out of your emotional body,
Yeah,
right? To be able to like go through and like do the things that needed to be done and not just be completely overwhelmed by it. And
100%.
as I'm listening to you and witnessing you, like one of the things that I'm like wondering about is like this part of like the storytelling that lets the body and the mind like reconnect
Mm,
and like move towards one another again, where it's like there's like a
hmm.
reconciliation that happens through like the sharing of the experience.
Yeah, I mean that when once we had the hospital like holding us, if you will, like
Mm-hmm.
taking care of her, I think there was more of an allowance to like be merged,
Mm,
right? Because it's like it's not on you at that point. You don't have any control, which is
mm-hmm.
really hard. But that's when like you can really like connect with yourself and like, I was just showing up as myself at that point, right? At one point, I whispered to my wife, like, whatever happens, it's going to be okay. Basically saying, like, if she dies, it's still going to be okay. It'll be the most tragic thing in our lives, and it'll be the hardest thing that we have to do, but we will get through this. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she did not like that, afterwards. She was like, that killed me when you said that. But she's like, I understood what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a lot. I had to step out a lot out of the room and get outside because it's those rooms, man. They're places where people die,
Yeah.
and it's really hard to feel your connection when you're in a room like that, or at least I'm not at a point in my practice where I really can. And so it was kind of a revealing thing for me of like, oh, and yeah. But what I was going to get to though is that when I was the one that was had to be in control, when I was the one having to like pull the ripcord and drive my daughter to the hospital, that part I had to be completely disconnected from what was going on emotionally
Mm-hmm.
because I had a job at hand, and like I needed to do that job fucking perfectly, and I couldn't let emotion get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And man, it was while it was the scariest thing ever, it was fucking awesome too, in a way. Like the the speed at which like I was so proud of myself for the how
Mm-hmm.
I handled it, and how
Mm-hmm.
like I did not hesitate. I did not worry about anything but my daughter and my family's safety in that car. And I drove so fucking fast. I drove so defensively, but also just aggressively as hell. And my son the whole time is like, whoa, dada, you're going fast.
Mm-hmm.
We fly through a stop sign and he goes, uh-oh. And he was amazing throughout the whole thing. And I mean, my wife, she fucking saved our daughter's life, in the car or
Mm.
flying down the road. So yeah, that part I'm definitely telling that is helping me more connect with just the immense amount of fear that was in the background when I
Yeah.
was going through that.
And like part of what I hear is like this like sharpening of will and focus.
Mhm.
And it's actually like fueled by that, right? It's like you've been
Yep.
kicked into this, like,
Mhm.
to use like the term like sympathetic nervous system dominance, where it's like
Mhm.
all that matters, single pointed focus. I get this girl and my family safely to the hospital.
Yep.
Meanwhile, your wife is kind of like probably in a similar state, like just like giving whatever she needs to give to Indy to keep her going while you're
Yeah.
getting there.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that the switch flipping and like we got to go. So like
Mm.
what happened there? Like how did you guys like just like you didn't call 911, you're just like nope, we're going. Like what
So
was that?
this
Yeah.
this is the craziest part of the story in my mind.
Mm,
And this gives me tingles because it's like we lead the most blessed lives if we choose to see it that way. And if we listen to the whispers, if we like let spirit in, it will guide us in the most amazing ways that you don't even see. And this happened to us in this moment because the night before, my wife and my son were actually in the emergency room for my son.
mm,
So the whole event with my daughter happened on Thursday night. On Wednesday, we get home from a little outing to cook dinner. And we got home a little later than expected. So we had to be quick with the way we cooked dinner because we got to get our kids down in the next hour. And my wife had ordered a little knife for my son that's designed for ages 3 and above. But she's like, he's a precocious 2.5-year-old. Like, we'll give it to him. And it was this like little knife made by some German knife brand that's meant for like kids to get comfortable in the kitchen with their little kitty knife. But it's a fucking metal knife. And my wife just assumed that it was safe for him. She didn't like test it. She had read a bunch of reviews and she's like, oh, yeah, it's great, boss. So she just like in a rush to cook dinner was like, hey, Bodie, like, here's your knife. You can help me cook. And I kind of protested. I'm like, what? No, like, don't do. But I didn't want to start a fight. And I was tired. I was hungry. She was tired. She was hungry. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go get changed, and when I get back, dinner will be cooked, or we'll be already cooking dinner. I'll help out, and it'll be all good. So as I'm getting changed, I hear a like, "Oh fuck! Oh no! Oh no!" like screams. There's a lot of blood. I run upstairs, and my son had managed to like slice his index finger with this knife that my wife gave him. And like we didn't know at first if it was deep enough to warrant going and getting medical attention. We're not people that are to go to the doctor often. We don't go to the doctor. I sliced my knee a few years ago and I super glued it shut with the help of some friends, and it was down to the tendon. So yeah, I mean, that's just the type of the people we are. But like eventually we got it to stop bleeding enough after like maybe 10 minutes, son screaming. And it was like, yeah, it was down to like past the dermis, right? You saw some like, it was deep. I was like,
mhm,
okay. I was like, love, we're gonna have to get some medical attention. Like, let's go to urgent care. So we like pulled the ripcord then at that moment, right after like 15 minutes of hemming and hawing. And like in that time, like I'm someone who really struggles with people who make really dumb mistakes. And I have this like thing in me. I think it's passed down to me from my lineage of like, I want to like almost like shame them into admitting that they've been a fucking idiot.
mhm,
And which is, and I don't do it with like only the people I do it with are the people I love the most, which is, it's just how it is. It's so fucked up. Right. But,
mhm.
I am but a human and I have failings. And so for the first like 3 minutes of that whole interaction happening, I was just like, I wasn't like there to be there and help. I was there to like kind of stomp my feet and be like, what the fuck were you thinking of Kendra? Like, oh, and I wasn't yelling at her or anything, but I was like in my head, like pacing back and forth, like throwing that energy out into the room,
Mhm.
right? Getting a grip of myself. And my wife is super sensitive. She could feel it. And she was, she really didn't appreciate that. And we discussed it. after they had gotten back from the hospital. But anyways, long story short, she took him to urgent care as I stayed home to get our daughter to sleep. And we weren't able to go to one urgent care. We weren't able to go to the other urgent care because they were full. So she ended up having to go to the emergency room. But it was like that experience. And, he was totally fine. He got like 4 stitches in his finger. He was totally fine. Brought him home, went to bed, all good. No one was ever at risk of anything major. And he's healing up very nicely. But in that experience, it was the perfect fire drill.
Mhm.
And to have that fire drill happen the night before, the
Mhm.
fucking night before, like, what the fuck? Are you
Mhm.
serious?
Mhm.
And when that happened, so then when my daughter was going through her thing, there was no fucking hesitation. And we got out the door so fucking fast. And like, I can't help but think that if we didn't get out the door with that amount of speed and that much resolve, she wouldn't be with us right now. And so when I think about them, I think about that Chinese proverb story that I've heard a couple times. The last time I heard it was shared by our guy Caro, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like, the guy's horse runs away, and all the villagers are like, "Oh, you're so unlucky. Your horse is gone." And he's like, "Maybe." And then the next day, all the horses come back, or the horse comes back with a bunch of wild horses, and they're like, "You're so lucky. You got all these horses now." And he's like, "Maybe." And then his son breaks his leg trying to break the horses. "Oh, you're so unlucky." "Maybe." And then the drafting, conscription officer comes to draft people, and his son can't go to war because his leg's broken. And it was like that. Like my wife does like a dumb fucking move, and she's a responsible parent. Like she doesn't make silly mistakes like that, like almost ever. She had out of circumstances that happened, and it was it very well might have saved my daughter's life that happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'll just add in here because we got to pick Bodhi up, and I just want to
Mm-hmm.
that moment when we all came together in the parking lot,
Mm-hmm.
like that's man, ingrained in me. Like I can't
Yeah.
even imagine what you must have been feeling in that moment, and just
Mm-hmm.
to get to show up and support and and hold you even for that brief moment was just
Mm.
powerful, man. Really
Yeah.
powerful for me.
Yeah. That was massive for me too.
And your son is just such a trooper that night.
Yeah.
Such a trooper. We got him home, fed him dinner, and he's showing, he's every once in a while he'd touch something, ow, careful with the hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Because his finger had been sliced the night before.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about you had shared coming in here that there were some lessons that you felt like you had learned that you wanted to
Mm.
share.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what those are, what stands out as something of the things that you've taken away from this experience
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and feel like are worth sharing.
Absolutely. Well, I think the biggest lesson I learned from this experience is just the value of a spiritual practice.
Mm.
And even not even a spiritual practice, but a connection to spirit. Without it, I I don't know how I would have handled this experience. Like I was talking with my mother actually the next day and filling her in on she didn't really understand. They were off skiing in the mountains when I told them, and they came back as quickly as they were able to. But I don't think she fully understood the severity, how close to death our daughter, a little Puma, was. And she was like, "How did you handle that that state when you were in limbo, right, for 3 hours, right?" And even after those 3 hours, it still wasn't. We still weren't out of the woods, right?
Mhm.
She ended up having a spinal tap. She had to, they had moving her from thing to thing. fevers rising, you know, changing breathing tubes, like every transition, there was that moment of like, this could, we have to do this right, or this could get very serious. But with my mother asking me that, it was, I didn't really answer, but in my head, as I was feeling into it, and in my heart, it was like, what got me through was my spiritual practice. And every time I went into my mind throughout those 3 hours of hell, it was a horrible place.
Mm-hmm.
My mind would think about my daughter dying and what we were going to tell my son, and the party that we were going to throw, for we're moving and we're throwing a farewell party, and how it was going to turn into a funeral, and how, you know, my son, like, he loves his sister, and his sister is here on this planet to help guide him. Like, I have no doubt, like, she's got this very calm, easeful, loving energy to her, and she's feisty too. It's an amazing combination. She's incredible, and like, to lose that spirit would be such a loss for like us and for the world at large, and for him too, because like, my son is this like wild, you know, amazing, magnetic, and like expansive person, but he needs that person to help ground him, and that's his sister, or at least one of them. And they, like, it was like, feel like thinking in to that loss was just like the worst fucking thing ever. And the only thing that kept me together and kept my sanity and allowed me to like be there present in that moment was like that spiritual practice, and that prayer, and that like reaching out to people and you know, getting their prayers, and knowing that everyone was praying for her, and then, you know, going outside and ultimately just like being with the heavens above and the earth below, and just trusting, you know, letting go of the fear as much as I could. And I was scared shitless the whole fucking time, but just like keeping that, like keeping that trust equally strong, or as strong as I could. And, you know, and it's so hard too when like my wife is someone who like really has struggles with that too. I think we all do. And she was going in that same place, and, you know, she was probably 50-50 with like the trust and the like, my daughter's going to die. And so having to like be there and be as sturdy as I could for her too, right? Which, you know, is moderate success, but I don't think there's a success is the really the measure we're going for here, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
your daughter's home.
yeah.
Y'all are together. At least in my book, like, great success.
Great
Great
fucking
success.
success. Fuck yeah. So that was probably the biggest lesson for me, is just like how valuable like this connection to spirit is. While I've been really in a deep dive with that for many years now, it's like everyone, we have a lot more work to do. And like, I have a lot more work to do. And that's okay. But like, I you know, I intend to do that work.
Mm. Yeah. So you shared like this, like, earth below, heaven above, like this connection, and is that kind of the way that you get like anchored into that trust and spirit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of them. For me, I don't think any of us know what it is. It's kind of like, for me, it's the great unknown, great spirit. And when I'm like in a, you know, going to treat someone with acupuncture, I want to become a conduit between the heavens and the earth, right? And so, yeah, for me in that moment, it was that. And, you know, I wanted my daughter to stay on this earthly plane with us. So it's not just a connection to the heavens, it's also a connection to the earth and staying rooted here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it felt right.
Yeah. And I asked just because, you know, there's so many different ways that people are taught to pray, to connect with the mystery. And I feel like one of the things that really resonates for me is to be exposed to as many different ways as I can, in the ways
Mm-hmm.
that people connect to that energy that's like
Mm-hmm.
truly unnameable and
Yeah.
like really impossible to like talk to, but like the actions, the way that we like do it is shareable. And then it's
Yeah.
like and what I hear you speaking to so clearly is this experience of feeling that connection in
Mm-hmm.
the midst of the most painful, scary, and challenging moment in your existence,
Mm-hmm.
and how that connection is what carried you through.
Exactly. Thank you
And
for
like,
putting it in a tight little package.
yeah, and like, like my mind then goes to like, what would that have looked like if you didn't have that connection?
Yeah, I don't want to know.
Right. Right. It's not a good place to go.
No,
Right.
no.
And so therein lies the call to practice for me.
One of them for sure.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that there are other things that you learned and can share.
Yeah.
What else stands out?
I think there's one other big lesson
Mm-hmm.
that was super valuable, and this is actually more of a pragmatic lesson,
Mm-hmm.
and that is this entity of hospitals.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
And dude, it's a fucking wild place. Because like before I say anything else, like they saved my daughter's life.
Mm-hmm.
That I have no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God for modern medicine and the miracle that it is, because it's fucking powerful. Like it's amazing what they're able to do. And like the amount of people they have like doing these things and working together is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am amazed that they make it work as well as they do.
Mm-hmm.
It is a massive moving, freight train. And the fact that they can like make it work and manage all these people, it's really quite a sight to behold. And
Mm-hmm.
like being from a whole different world, this world of like more holistic healing, it's like healing doesn't go on in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And saving a life can, but it like there is a very quick moment where it goes from like you are saving this person's life to you are now like you've sunk your claws into them and you're like almost like killing them. And like learning, like it was fucking crazy because like we had gone through fucking hell, and there's a moment where you could feel in your body like, hey, this is not right. And like they're doing all these things out of abundance of caution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like first they give her a CT scan after they got her stable, and it's like, okay, that seems like you're doing the right thing. On board, let's do it. Let's make sure she doesn't have a tumor, make sure she doesn't have a brain bleed. Yes. Okay, now that we've done that, we need to do a spinal tap to make sure she doesn't have bacterial meningitis or some other infection of the central nervous system. And it's like, okay, that has spinal tap has risks, but she almost died. She had a 3 hour long seizure. I can see the like validity towards like a differential diagnosis. I'm not even familiar with the word or the term differential diagnosis. Maybe I should explain this to listeners for anyone who isn't, but it's like they basically narrow down what it can be. So it's a process of elimination.
Mm-hmm.
So they're eliminating possible things and the more serious things first, to the point where then they know like, okay, it's because you have these symptoms, it can only be like these three things. And it's probably this one, right? Or it can only be this. So we know it's this, right? And it still could be something else because you might not just know of it, but this wealth of knowledge has suggested that this is what it is. So, yeah, so they give her a spinal tap. And like I've witnessed people who've had lifelong complications due to spinal taps. So you're like, like she's only like 15 months old. We're giving her a fucking spinal tap, and then we're in the room as they're giving it, and they're not getting any fluid, and they have to like tip her over and use gravity, and they're like moving around. She's got a fucking needle in her spine, and it's like this isn't good. But like, okay, like we need to like make sure she doesn't have bacterial meningitis, I guess. Okay, they got that. Cultures are being done. She's on all the drugs, fentanyl, fucking 15-month-old baby on fucking fentanyl and like one or two other sedatives, anti-seizure medication. I don't even remember what else she's on, but she's on some other things, anti-anxiety medication. And you're like, all of these medications are hotter in our system. And as they start to figure out, like, oh, she has a slightly elevated white blood cell count, so she probably has an infection. And then they discover that she comes back positive for an adenoid virus or adenovirus, which is it's basically just a viral infection, like a common cold almost, but a really nasty one. At that point, it's like you need all your systems working the best they can and your immune system functioning to fight this thing. And so you want to get her off of the breathing tube. You want to get her off of the like any oxygen. You want to just get her off of all these things, off these medications, so that her system isn't having to both fight a virus and process through immense amounts of toxicity. And because of the institution and because of a variety of factors, that's a very slow moving process for them. And if it was best for the patient, if you had like one-on-one care and they're like, we're going to do what's absolutely best 100% for this patient, they would have gotten her off all that stuff much, much faster. But because of like, there's other patients, there's only so many doctors, there's, you have a nurse with you in the PICU the whole time, but they can't make the decisions necessary. And some of the really good nurses they take a little bit of autonomy and they make the right decisions and they'll help you out if you advocate for yourself. But you have to, as the parent or as a patient, you have to be fighting them tooth and nail the whole way. And so it's like you go from this place of being held and like in trust of this entity that's saving your daughter's life to being like, oh, now at this moment it's switched. And now I have to save my daughter's life. And you are actually holding her back. And like the worst place to recover from an illness is a hospital. Right? At a certain point, once it's not an absolute emergency.
Mm-hmm.
So it was wild how it switched so quickly, so dramatically, and like given we had we're totally like shell shocked, and we're not the best with our boundaries either. We're very like caring people. We want to like make sure we like honor everyone's feelings and things like that, right? Because of all these things, we didn't like jump on ship with like, oh, we need to fight for our daughter now immediately. And it took like a moment for my wife and I, like maybe an hour of like, I had to like go outside, connect back to spirit, and like circle the wagons within myself and be like, what am I here for? Respect my inner listening, trust my intuition. And what helped me do that was I reached two of the people that I reached out to basically told me like, trust your instincts. Another one was like my spiritual plumber. He's my therapist. He's a plumber by trade. Love the man to death. He was like, what did he say? He said something along the lines of like, get connect to spirit, trust your instincts, or listen to your inner listening. And so I did that, and I came back, and I was like, okay, this is what we need to do. And my wife was like, whoa, like you're super like aggro, like calm down. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm like, we're here to get Indy out and safe. So we're going to do that. And I need you on my team. And at that moment, she's like, okay. We didn't fight each other. We circled as a unit. And then from there, it was a battle with the hospital for the next 24 hours.
Wow.
So from midday Friday, it was like she was clearly going to be better until midday Saturday when we got out. But if we didn't fight, we'd probably still be there. And it's Sunday today. And they probably would get us out by like Sunday night, Monday morning. And she would have gotten probably like 3 times as many drugs. And, you don't know what's going to happen. She might have been fine, but it's like that shit has a cost. Especially like something like fentanyl for a 15-month-old baby.
So what you just shared, like, I mean, there's this thread that's like peaked itself throughout throughout the whole story that you've shared and your experience of it to me, which is like that instinctual knowing, and like just that instinct, that gut, that like intuitive knowledge of like what needs to happen like in any given moment.
Yeah.
And then we also have like trust, right, which you've already talked about. And so there's like,
Yeah.
it's like, what are you trusting in any
Mm-hmm.
given moment, and how
Yeah.
do you know what to trust? And
Yeah.
like, I'm just imagining y'all, like you're in the hospital, like you're witnessing your daughter's life literally being saved
Yeah.
in real time over and over again for
Mm-hmm.
hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like there is a trust and a reliance on this system that's in place with these people that are doing this thing, because without it, your daughter's not gonna she's not gonna come out of here.
Yeah.
Right. And then like you said, there's this moment where it's like it shifts.
Yeah.
And now like you still need to trust in what you know to be true, like in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved, like, for me, like you sharing about going out and like, okay, I actually have to like get out of this space for a second,
Yeah.
for a few moments,
Mm-hmm.
to get clear on where I'm at. What am I here for? Like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
here to protect my daughter. I need to call on some support, some friends, some guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey man, like trust yourself here.
Yeah.
And one of the themes that's like, I have big hangups with allopathic medicine, like in general, like
Yeah.
kind of like traditional, like hospital medicine, right?
Yeah.
And I have a huge amount of respect for the emergency side of it,
Fuck yeah.
right? Like it's saved my life. It's now saved like more of my loved ones' lives
Mm-hmm.
just in
Mm-hmm.
the last few days.
Yeah.
Um, and this piece that's like I'm just like I'm imagining being in the car while you're calling 911 and having them tell you we can't give you medical advice.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And like my gut just does, like, it clenches up. I get pissed.
Yeah.
I get pissed. Yeah. Yeah. As a parent um who has now like gone through this process with the institution that is our medical system, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
with all of its blessings and all of its curses, if you will.
Yep. Yep.
Like, what are some of the standout things that you learned about, like, how do you advocate for your
Mm.
daughter
Yeah.
and her well-being in this context, right? Like, what did you learn about that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in that, I would say, like, if I were to do it again, or if it were to happen again, right? I don't think I'd choose to do this again. I would take that moment outside a little more often, even. And I would really make sure to, like, my job is to maintain my ground throughout the whole experience as best I can. And if that requires reaching out to people, talking to people, but just being aware and alert. And also, I think a bigger piece too is like making sure that my teammate, my wife, is also in the right state. So we're both like we're on the same team without a doubt. Like, because there was a moment there where I was like starting to get a little snappy with the nurse and be like, "Hey, she just gave her fucking anti-anxiety medication, and the doctor said that we're trying to get her off of all the sedatives." And then I asked her, "Hey, isn't that going to sedate her more?" And she's like, "No, that's not what the anti-anxiety medication is." And I'm like, I'm pretty fucking sure. Like, I know enough to know that anti-anxiety medication is a fucking sedative. It might not be directly a sedative, but it will sedate the system. Sure enough, it fucking does. Like, it's what I knew it was, and I let that happen in that moment because my wife and I were still not like totally in line. And she's like, "No, you're being a little like don't get too like And it why I got a little snappy was because I had let that boundary get crossed. And there was almost an anger towards myself that I had let that boundary be crossed. And I knew, like, deep down, like, why didn't you fucking say anything,
Mm,
Because it was like at that moment is when things switched, right? Where I
mhm,
had to stop trusting the institution. I had to start trusting me.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, it's really like being fully present in it and being full, like taking the time, the things you need to take to be able to have that presence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to making sure that your teammates, your team is like, we're all together in this. So we're not feuding each other. We're like, we're one, right? And so once my wife and I became one, it was like it was tremendous. And I like have so much joy and like pride almost for how well we handled it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were working together, we were cracking them down, and like we got out of there much faster. And we got her off of, like, we had to take her from a breathing tube to a BiPAP machine to like the intranasal things. Like it was a process to get her back on her feet and well.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she was so drugged out afterward, and like they're like, oh, I mean, usually kids just pop right out. I was like, fuck, no, they don't. Don't tell us that. Like, and I kept mentioning, like, she had a lot of toxic load, and people wouldn't even, the nurses, doctors, they wouldn't even like recognize that like these drugs they gave her are challenging on her system.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, how can you not even like admit that? Like, just fucking say, like, yeah, that is really hard on her liver
Mm-hmm.
because it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they just don't even want to tell the parents that because they think that if they don't tell them, then their parents won't know. But it's like, I know. I've
Mm-hmm.
I've had to do the medical research. Like I'm literally studying for my biomedicine board exam for acupuncture right now. Like I know the side effects of a lot of these drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Mm-hmm.
the mechanisms of action of these drugs. I know how toxic they are to certain organ systems in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it just kind of getting off task here or off
So
subject.
to kind of like, I think what I'm hearing from you is like, one, it's like this practice of like finding your ground, right? So
Yeah.
you're in this situation that's like incredibly traumatic,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? In the truest sense of the word.
Yep.
And like you're having to find your ground constantly because as soon like
Yep.
the default in that is like your system is going to move towards a traumatized state where you're
Hmm.
either like fleeing, fighting,
Yep.
freezing,
Yep.
or whatever combination of those, right?
Yep.
So, okay, where's my breath? Where's my body? What am I in? How do I anchor
Hmm.
with my partner? Right.
Yep. Yep.
And that like I just come back to like kind of the same thing as the spiritual practice. Like that has to be a
Yes.
practice
Bingo.
outside of these types of situations. Because if you don't have
Yep.
it, like you're not going to have it. It's
No.
just not going to happen.
No.
And then within that, it's advocating for the health, right? And knowing what that means. So it's like one of the things that stands out is like, so you have this knowledge, right?
Yep.
Like, it might be basic compared to some, but like compared to most,
Totally.
it's actually like really like you have a lot
Yeah.
more fluency than I do around medications, right?
Yeah. Like I knew what they were talking about sometimes, and they're
Right.
like, "Oh, this guy, are you in the medical field?" Well, kinda. And I'm training to become an acupuncturist. Like, oh,
Right. Right.
okay.
So we don't even go down that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
so within that, then it's like, what's happening? Right. And like, and be having the audacity to step in and actually ask, what are you doing? Why
Hmm.
are you doing it?
Yeah.
Right. Because like once we know a little one's going to be okay, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Right. You don't want to step in the way of like they're saving her life. But
Yeah.
now it's like, okay, life has basically been saved. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And how do we move her in the direction of getting home to a place where she can actually heal and rest?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right.
and and it was crazy because like we're people, and I think a lot of people in our culture are people who don't want to step on toes.
Sure.
We don't want to make confrontation, and the hospital is the worst place to have that perspective, because if we didn't step on toes, if we didn't have confrontation, it's like who knows what would have happened. And I know a number of people that have gotten tremendously sick, and I remember my mentor telling me like hospitals are where people like hospitals can kill people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's not a place for healing. And so that was in the back of my mind and like in the back of my heart, even like I could feel that. I could feel that in that room. And I could feel this one nurse that was like fighting us and was like one of these people that is like, trusts in the medications and trusts in that. And then we had this other nurse that was amazing. And she would like, we'd be like kind of pushing and she's like, yeah, we don't need to have this IV line in anymore. Like it doesn't even fucking work. Let's take this out. Like, oh yeah, let's just cut this medication. Like I'll tell the doctor later. And I'm like, well, I guess better to beg for forgiveness and ask for permission. She's like, yeah, in some cases, yeah, this is the right thing. And so like there were those people in there that were like, they were connected to spirit and you could feel that. And it was like, okay, this person I can like lean on a little bit more. But then there'd be those other people that you're like, oh, this is not an ally here. Like this person. So it was a trusting of your intuition on people too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And finding those allies in the space that
Mm-hmm.
were there to really like they got, okay, we get this. These people are educated. They know what they're doing. They know how to take care of her. Like let's push them along. So yeah,
Man.
man.
So y'all are home now.
Mm-hmm.
Indy's right now taking a nap, right?
Taking a nap. We had to
Yeah.
break for a pee break. I checked on her, put my hand on her back. She's breathing nice and well. A little sick, a little fever, but it's like it never happened.
Wow, man.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel so fortunate to get to be in your all's life, like truly. And like that both of your little ones are just so special.
Yeah.
And just like knowing the level of care and connection that you have to them. Um, and I feel like I'm a better parent being around y'all. Like
Hmm.
I really mean that.
Feelings
And
mutual, brother.
yeah, thank you. Is there anything more about this journey that y'all have been on that you feel like you want to share right now?
I guess I just want to like mention again just like how much being held by our community and like community that we didn't even almost like think we had.
Mm,
The like upwelling of support that we had was fucking amazing. It brought me to tears probably like 50 times, like literally. Neighbors dropping off juice and neighbors dropping off food. A friend of ours, like not even asking, like, hey, do you guys need food? She just showed up at the hospital with like a home cooked meal for the both of us.
mm,
Like, are you fucking, and it was delicious. Like, what? And she had her baby in the car. And I was like, hey, do you want to come up? He's like, no, I can't. My son's in the car sleeping. But like, I'm like, okay, I'll go down and grab him. Like, it was amazing. And yeah, it just, all the people that couldn't be there, whether they were busy or whether they were, in different states, but like just still checking in, praying for her, praying for us, like just giving that attention to our circumstance and just how much these like horrible experiences like bring people together and make you realize like how close how much closer we are than we may think we are
mm,
and how much closer we can be too.
mm. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really, really honored to be a member of that community for y'all. And just like, I feel like what you just said is just like the true power of like cultivating community.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like
Mm-hmm.
at least for me, like one of the things that I'm just seeing as like a theme here is just noticing the places where your practices in the quote unquote off time
Yeah.
have like just really paid in dividends
Yeah.
when like shit hit the fan, right?
Yeah.
Like the community aspect is one of those, right? It's like you take the
It
time,
is.
both of you, to nurture community and to call it in and to support it. And
Mm-hmm.
here it is, like showing up for you.
Yeah. And I mean, it was so amazing for me too, because it's like the near death of my daughter was so amazing because it's like, I didn't even know that people cared that much. Like
Yeah.
I have my thoughts on how things are, and it's the story I tell in my head. And I work to try to create that community, and it's not as well received as I want it to. My
Mhm.
mind wants to, but it like this showed it's still received.
Mhm.
And it maybe these people aren't able to show up in the way that I wanted them to show up, but they're willing to show up.
Mhm.
And that's fucking amazing. So it really taught me a lot in that way too.
Well, my friend, I feel like we're kind of coming up to that organic close.
I think
Do
so.
you feeling complete?
I am.
Cool. Thank you for dropping in with me. Thank you for sharing the story, and sharing your heart in it. I'm so, so grateful that Indy is home and safe.
Yeah, me too.
When you're ready to begin your journey, visit elementalmovement.life. We'll see you there.